Welcome, everybody, to the Sunday School Dropouts podcast. It's so exciting to be here with you today on a special episode. I'm thrilled that you guys are going to be able to experience this. So as you know, we typically have 2 episodes every month. And this month we are doing Q&As for the holidays, but we wanted to kind of give you a different type of episode, something that we're going to make into kind of a regular reoccurring thing. And so today is the first of those. And we're actually going to be meeting with 2 of my friends and colleagues, and also they are practitioners at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, Jeremy Lehmann and Jessica Hyne. And we are actually going to be doing a somatic experiencing session. So you guys will get to see it in real time. What would happen if you are working with a practitioner doing body-based trauma resolution therapy? Now, fair warning, we're not going to be talking about any sort of content that would be graphic or even probably stress-inducing in any fashion. You will hear Jessica, who is doing the role of the client, using an example from her own life where she has to be on stage talking with people. And that really is the extent of it. That's all you're going to hear in terms of the content of what we're working through in the session. But I'm really excited because so many times, people are accustomed to thinking that trauma therapy, you come in and you give all the gory details of what it is that has happened to you. And, people think that for good reason. That is, kind of what we see on movies and TVs. And to an extent, that's how a lot of people used to do therapy, is they would, the therapist would encourage them to do that. We just talk about what's happening and then it makes it better. But as trauma research has evolved and as we understand more about how trauma lives inside of us, how our nervous systems work, what we know is that we actually don't have to necessarily speak the story, though that can be important because that story being witnessed and heard is oftentimes very important. But in terms of actually resolving the trauma, we don't actually need to. However, that sounds really weird to a lot of people. They don't really know what to do with that because it's so different than what they've ever experienced. And so we thought it could be a good idea to show you what a session might be like. So we're going to do that, and we will have, several episodes. They'll come out, every couple of months, every few months, something like that. So this is an episode where if you have access to watching it on YouTube, I would encourage that because you'll just pick up on some other things. But even if you're just listening to it, I think you're going to get a lot out of it. There's probably a little bit more talking than what would normally happen in a somatic experiencing session, simply because Jeremy and Jessica both knew that there was going to be people listening. And so instead of just noticing, say, like body movements, they actually had to say, oh, I noticed that this is happening, or I noticed that this is happening. So you're still going to get a lot out of it, even if you're listening. But this is one where I would encourage you that if you have the possibility to watch this on YouTube, please go ahead and do so. You're also going to hear us debrief the session afterwards. And there's a little bit of an intro at the beginning where we talk through a little bit about what we're going to do. So I don't want to necessarily go through all of that again, but I did just want to kind of introduce what we're doing and even why we're doing it. So like I said, somatic experiencing doesn't necessarily focus on the content, meaning the story. It focuses on our body. It is a different way of doing therapy. It's actually not technically a therapeutic modality. It would be considered a trauma resolution modality, and you don't have to be a therapist in order to get trained and certified in it. I really love it because, and you'll hear me say this in the episode, it's kind of an act of rebellion to high control religion. So you think about how many times so many of us were told in high control religion to suppress our bodies and to silence our natural urges, to vilify and, think of our bodies as evil. And one of the things that I love about somatic experiencing is that I feel like it's a return home to ourselves. Our body is the main tool of healing. And it's getting back in touch with these parts of ourselves that have been cut off and fragmented in order to fit into this high control system. And so in a way, I think that doing somatic experiencing is kind of flying in the face of high control religion and going against some of the fundamentalist teachings, because the body, which was thought of to be so as the place of evil, is the thing that heals us. So I'm excited for that. There's a lot of different things that you might notice in the session, just kind of some different language that's used. You're going to notice that we're talking about emotions, images, movements or behaviors, sensations, and then of course, meaning or thoughts, right? But what we're trying to do is kind of talk about all of that or navigate all of that rather than just moving up into our heads and making meaning of what it is that was happening, because that's what we normally do. So I'm excited for y'all to witness this, and I would love to hear your thoughts. So please make sure to comment on social media. You can send us DMs. You're always welcome to send us an email from our website and let us know what you thought of this show. Again, I want to be really clear that we're not getting into any content. So there's going to be no graphic stories. There's going to be no narratives that are shared about what it is that Jessica is actually processing through. The only thing that you as the listener or the viewer will know is that she is about to have an experience where she has to be on stage and other people will be looking at her. So there, I don't need to put necessarily a trigger warning on this. However, we know that we always might feel, we always are prone to a variety of different triggers, and what is triggering for one person may or may not be for the next person, and vice versa. So like every episode, make sure that you are taking care of yourself. And if you need to pause the episode or skip it altogether, we certainly will not be offended, and you can just come back to the next one. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just get into it. And I hope you enjoy our conversation about somatic experiencing, the session of somatic experiencing, and then debriefing it afterwards. Welcome, Jessica and Jeremy. I'm so glad you guys are here today. I'm excited for today because we are going to do a practice session for somatic experiencing, which all three of us are trained in. Jeremy, I think we talked about this on our episode that we did a while ago. You and I went through basically the whole training, 8/9 of the training together.
Yes.
and then Jessica quick hurried up and is getting hers done too. So this is exciting. But I know we're going to spend the bulk of our time doing an actual session, but I thought it would be good to just kind of help set people up for what they're about to experience and kind of the flow of a somatic experiencing session that they might go through with a practitioner. So yeah, I kind of have some notes, and I wonder if you guys want to speak to that a little bit. The first part of any SE session really is settling. And yeah, if you want to explain that or talk about why that's important, go for it.
Well, I'll kind of start us off, which is, settling. I think of it as feeling into safety, which is like, how calm can I get? Like, how settled and in my body can I get? And so many times we use things like looking around whatever space you're in. And, you've probably maybe heard in the past 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is essentially picking out 5 things you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things you can hear, and maybe 2 things you can smell, and getting your senses online right where you are. And obviously settling is this ability for you to feel right in the moment if it's safe. But again, it's so important that we allow this settling when we actually feel safe, right? If we're in a room or a space that is actually safe to us. And to me, being able to feel even deeper into this, like how far can this go inside of me? That it's not just sort of like, oh, I know where I am. I'm in my bedroom and there's 5 things. It goes a lot deeper than that. I sense that one way to do that is to kind of move from exteroception, which is kind of like the outside of you, into the interoception. That's like the felt sense of your body itself and what's going on in there.
Yeah.
And being able to do both of those things at the same time, which is I know where I am exteriorly, but I also can sense inside my body, and it feels calm, it feels settled, it feels regulated. That to me is kind of what settling really looks like. What about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I one of the things that I think a lot about with trauma, like it dislocates us like from where and when we are. And those are the two things that when I'm having people like settle into where we are, some of that is for the experience of the person settling into the space, but some of that is for me to get a sense of like, how much access do you have to this felt sense of safety when safety is available? One. Also, often there is this conceptual idea of, oh, of course they're safe. I'm safe because reasons, but there isn't this like palpable sense, this felt sense of, oh, this is what safety actually feels like. This is how this entire organism responds when safety feels present. And so that's one of the things that I notice is often missing for a lot of folks is they don't have any way of really being able to describe what safety feels like and how they actually know that safety is present. And so we have really like we have super highways to our trauma responses and our pathways to grounding and safety and presence. Those paths often aren't very clear. Sometimes it's just this little opening in the brush. And so sometimes I have to do a little bit of convincing on this part of the work that this isn't something other than trauma work. This isn't something to distract from the trauma work. This isn't something to just help you feel better. Like what we're doing here is helping your nervous system know that, oh, I can return to safety. And these are some of the reliable ways that my own organism knows get me there more effectively than, other ways.
Yeah. And I know you kind of briefly mentioned it there. And then I've had the luxury of knowing this about you because we've done so many practice sessions together.
So many.
Is that I know I'm like, we just every time we're together, we're practicing with margaritas. It's fine.
Margarita in your body.
Very calming, very safe. Yes. But I know that the co-regulation piece with the practitioner and the person who's coming in for a session is really important. Part of that settling and arriving process where we're not only checking out to see like, where's your nervous system at, but we're checking in with ourselves as the practitioner. Where's my nervous system at? Can I use then my nervous system to be able to help you regulate yours? You can, there's next topic. Speak to that if you want.
Yeah. I think I try and do it with, they talk about in somatic experiencing kind of receiving eyes and what that looks like when somebody is being seen, but they're being received. They're not, being glared at or too close even, but what kind of distance for me as the practitioner feels comfortable for this client. And I feel like, I have practices before sessions that are about getting me in a space where I can access that part of me that's super, super grounded. So when they arrive to my session, no matter if they're really elevated, maybe they're shut down, that they can sense whether it's the speed with which I talk or the way I look at them using my eyes, that this is a very embodied practice, I think, because our bodies are so sensitive. If we are dysregulated, it can throw off the entire session. And so to me, I do some things like, and I'm sure Jeremy does it too, because he's told me about some of it, but feeling into my feet, like how settled are they? Can I feel the rootedness of the ground rising up to meet me in this moment with a client? But yeah, what about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I like that co-regulation piece. I'll usually do a little bit of nervous system education on that. And um, the thing that I let people know is that when we come into the world, we have an underdeveloped nervous system that needs an external nervous system that's regulated, grounded, has capacity, so that we can learn how to navigate our own. That's how co-regulation is, how we learn first how to navigate our own nervous systems.
Mm-hmm.
Often we don't get that. And so we have, the variety of ways that our nervous system is just tuned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I'm doing this work with folks, especially that come from these higher control and more fundamentalist backgrounds, I will often check in with like, how does the space between you and me feel?
Mm-hmm.
And really be curious about that. And it's often some version of like, oh, it feels fine. I'm like, what lets you know that it feels fine? Well, I know that you're, the letters after my name. And I'm like, nope,
Mm-hmm.
this is absolutely not a reason to trust me.
Yeah.
Like I set this up in a way that like you have lots of permission here to slow down and make decisions about how much you even trust here or not. And I want your trust to be based on how this space feels rather than because of my job title.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so paying attention to that, and do you feel safe here because this feels like a co-regulating presence, or are you overriding some things that show up in spaces like this?
Yeah. Yeah. So I know before we get into the session, I mean, because I'm sure people will see this in and experience this in the session, and then we'll probably debrief about it afterwards. But when we talk about, okay, if let's just briefly touch on like the lack of content, meaning like a lot of people come into a session and they're going, I've got to tell you all the nitty gritty details. Like that's the expectation of a therapy session, of a coaching session, of, that sort of thing. And to their credit, that is how it is, like stereotypically, colloquially, like that's what we see on TV, all the things. But we all know with somatic experiencing, and our clients have experienced as well, like minimal content is almost the expectation or the invitation, I should say. And then we also have there's an acronym that in somatic experiencing, we call it SIBAM, one that the three of us talk about a lot from Kimberly Ann Johnson's book, Call of the Wild, is times. And these are like different channels of meaning. So before we get into the session, I wonder if you want to just talk a little bit about why we don't need content and kind of how those different meaning channels, play into that.
Yeah. Well, it's so fascinating. I feel like in order to really do trauma work, it has to be just these little bites, little bitty nuggets, I guess you could say. And I find with a lot of people, sometimes it's too much, too soon, too fast, which is trauma. And they're just re-traumatizing themselves. When you tell the story, it's just too much. Even just the story, your body is reliving it. And so just getting the beginning, the very beginning of something, like, oh, I had a fight at work. That's enough to bring up the felt sense of what that experience was without it being too much, because we haven't gone too far into it yet. And I know that's a hard sell, but I think if people were willing to experiment with themselves, like, hey, I'll just try one session and see what happens, I think they might be stunned at how much can be done with almost no content at all. And I really do recommend for people to try it themselves, because to me, I want the felt sense that you feel like, oh, this is right for me. And I understand resistant parts and why they might be there. Totally understandable to want to be heard. Totally understandable to want somebody to validate what has happened to you and to believe you. Totally valid. But also sometimes it's too much to go into a lot of that. And sometimes with clients, I find too that we kind of do half sessions, like, hey, we'll do this for part of the session, and then the part of you that wants to be heard, let's hear from it, and see how that goes for you, and get the felt sense of what that's like. So that's kind of how I take it.
Yeah. Jeremy, thoughts on that with just kind of the minimal content and or times channel, SciBam, that sort of thing?
Yeah. When I started before I learned somatic experiencing, I felt like I was doing a lot of work to make sure that I got the order of the events correct and all of the who said what parts correct. And like, it felt like a lot of details that I was juggling. And it felt like in all of these details that I was juggling, somehow something important was still being missed. And I didn't know how to make sense of that really until like till I started paying attention to the experience itself. Like, trauma doesn't exist in the details of what happened. It's how what happened gets lodged in our nervous system and in our felt sense. And that's where that understanding and that shift for me was what helped me be able to see, oh, this might be what's going on here, in a way that all of the plot points sometimes are really distracting from.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really helpful. And, it's kind of like one of these things where it's like, we can only talk about riding a bike for so long, and then we just got to get onto the bike and try it. So maybe that's a good place where we can transition into like the actual session, and you guys being a client and a practitioner of somatic experiencing, and everybody else will get to experience it alongside. All right. Well, then here we go.
Well, Jessica, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay today.
Doing okay today. So we're going to be doing a demo session and whatever for Laura, and this, I think it's super exciting. So can we take a few moments just to kind of arrive here together in this space, in this Zoom space together?
Yeah.
Maybe also just taking in your physical space on your side of this conversation, the room that you're in.
Sure. I'm just going to kind of take a minute to look around. And my dog is sleeping over in the corner. I have the light on, and I love my lamp that's up there, the fixture. And I've got some windows, and I can kind of see the sky from the windows.
What does that sky do for you when you notice it?
When I let it in, kind of focus on it. Just a deep breath, and I can feel my breath kind of going a little bit deeper, a little bit further down. And having my eyes up, I feel like I can feel my shoulders kind of relaxing.
Shoulders relaxing.
More awareness in my feet.
Ooh, what are you noticing in your feet?
Yeah, I can feel the carpet beneath my feet. I don't have any shoes on. And yeah, there's just a general, like, more relaxed sensation kind of through the whole body. At first it was kind of towards the top, and now it's like settling through my gut and down through my legs. And they're sort of like, they're not moving, which is a settled feeling for me.
Yeah. It was interesting as you were describing noticing outdoors and that impact that was having on your body and nervous system. I have a window over here too, and could see it out of the corner of my eye. And as you're noticing that, I noticed like a few moments of settling on my side as well. Kind of just this opening in my own chest that kind of felt like it was in sync with what was happening on your side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That feels nice to kind of come back to looking more at the screen now and at you, and just feeling here, but also like a little bit lower. Yeah, I feel like I went from maybe like a 3 out of 10 to kind of like a 1 or a 0 out of 10.
Going from a 3 out of 10 to a 1 or 0 out of 10.
Mm-hmm. In terms of sort of energy or activation or anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Is there anywhere in particular where you noticed that settling happening?
Mm.
What let you know that that dropped from a 3 to a 1 or a 0?
I think for me, it felt like I became a lot more aware that I have a body and a lot more connected to things below kind of the neckline.
Uh-huh.
And I think another way is when my breath feels deeper and longer and further down into my belly, and I can almost like feel my belly moving in addition to kind of upper chest area.
Sure.
And kind of my speech slowing down.
Mm-hmm. So slower speech, you feel like your breath is kind of filling your trunk, going all the way down into the lower abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
Softer,
Mm-hmm.
just slower.
Mm-hmm.
And you notice that you have a body.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would it be okay to just hang out with this feeling of noticing that you have a body and hanging out with this presence for just a few more moments?
Yeah. Yeah, that feels okay. And I'll kind of tell you what I notice as we give it a little bit of time. In this moment, I feel like I'm aware of my hands and kind of like their resting posture. And a little movement through the feet, but like awareness that they're there, like moving them a little to feel more into them.
Yeah.
And then I guess I sense my body being here, but no movement or no energy at all, just sort of like a steadiness.
No energy and no movement, but steadiness. Does that feel like a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling?
Definitely pleasant. Yeah,
Okay.
it feels like groundedness, kind of rootedness.
Grounded and rooted.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like almost like I have an awareness from like the top of my head all the way to the soles of my feet, but it feels grounding.
Got it.
Yeah.
So before we before we started recording, you were talking about some activation that had shown up, and I was curious if it felt okay to work with that a little bit, or if there's something else that feels more feels like you would prefer instead.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good place to start.
Okay.
Which is I have an event where there's going to be a lot of people and I'll be speaking. And even just saying that, I can feel.
Can we pause right there and just notice what starts to show up when you think about this, as you're kind of starting to head into this story?
Yeah. Yeah, I can just, there's a tightness in my gut. Feels almost like woundedness, like, and I kind of picture it in there, like it's hard and black.
Hard black woundedness.
Mm-hmm. Like kind of through my central core, kind of through my mid chest, all the way down towards this area is just some energy that I feel, like a little bit shallower breath, but also movement.
Got it.
Mm.
How would you describe that movement?
What did you say? Sorry.
How would you describe that movement?
Yeah.
You know,
Almost like swirling motion. Yeah.
Motion.
Yeah. And as we talk about it more, I can kind of feel the edges of it, and it starts to settle a little bit.
Got it. So just paying attention to it and noticing it.
Mm-hmm.
Also noticing that it's settling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know that it's settling.
It, like when I try to feel into that kind of centrally located area that had this swirling motion, now it feels more like a settledness, but my gut still feels like that tight wound kind of. And it feels very internal.
Got it. Do you notice any emotion attached to that sense of woundedness or
yeah. You know, it feels a bit like fear, I think is probably the word I would use.
and does it feel okay to pay attention to that right now, or does it feel like too much at all?
No, it doesn't feel like too much.
Okay.
But I think it definitely does feel like fear, and kind of the image that I have is kind of like almost like braidedness in there, like in its woundness, like it's tight.
Right, like a break.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And so kind of this braided black object is kind of what it feels like.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, we could either continue to like pay attention to this and maybe even give that area some support, or would it feel better to kind of move back to that sense of grounded presence that we were noticing earlier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I might want to explore a little bit of support, maybe like touch, self-touch to the area.
Sure. What kind of touch?
I feel like, let me explore a little bit as it seems like just gentle resting over the area.
Gentle resting over that area.
Yeah, feels supportive. And almost like the tightness is loosening a little bit. It's not.
Loosens as you give it support.
Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of going back to the image of kind of being on stage like that as we do this, just to see what happens when I do that. And it seems like when I draw up that kind of image of being on stage that way, it will kind of tighten a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But not as much as when we first started talking about it, when we first brought it up.
Mm-hmm.
And the more time that I allow my hand to kind of rest over this area, the more loose it seems to come, where it's a lot smaller than it was before. Like it kind of felt like, like 6 to 8 inches, and now it feels a lot smaller, almost like maybe the size of a tangerine.
Oh, that's quite a bit smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And does it still have that quality of fear attached to it, or has that changed at all in any way?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of saying like fear of being seen, like
Got it.
just where a lot of people will see me.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that feels right.
Got it.
Mm.
I'm curious, and if this doesn't land at all, you can just let me know. But I'm curious as you're kind of imagining being seen in
Mm.
that spot. Um, are there any eyes in the crowd that feel like they might be supportive?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Um, there'll be two friends there that I feel like will that know me well, that I feel
You
like
will. Hmm.
um that will feel like support for sure
Hmm.
in the crowd.
What happens in your body as as you bring those friends to mind?
Mm. Yeah.
I noticed the smile.
Yes. One is a very funny person. So, yeah. And so I can imagine she's going to be making hilarious faces. And um and then the other is just really, really caring. And so imagining her, I can feel her warmth. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah.
Also, just noticed some softening in your shoulders.
Mm-hmm. And I felt like I could breathe more into this area, like my breath could go down there.
Mhm.
Um, and that feels really nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, like as you're bringing to mind those two friends and imagining that support, does that spot in your abdomen change at all in response to that in any way?
Yeah, it's like a pea size at this point. Yeah, it's really small. The tension or the tightness. Um, yeah, when I imagine being seen by them, if I kind of hold their faces in my mental image, um, yeah, there's a lot of loosening in that area overall.
Okay. And what are you noticing kind of in the rest of your body as we're talking right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as we were exploring kind of deeper into the tightness, I think I kind of lost a little bit of the bottom half of my body, but now I did a little movement with my feet and I can feel the bottom half of my body more.
Got it.
Yeah. And a little bit more movement through my upper body feels nice. Like there's a feeling more closely aligned with where we were before, like when we were looking up in the sky
Got it.
and out our windows.
Well, we're about at a landing spot. Does this feel like your nervous system is at a good spot, or does there feel like anything that's still needing some attention right now?
No, this feels like a good spot to land.
Got it. Well, from here, how about if we just both take some time to look out our windows again?
Okay. All
I
right.
notice. Don't know, something just fell over behind me.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels really nice.
Well, lets you know that it feels nice.
Yeah, I think um yeah, I think I sense kind of that openness that you're speaking of a little bit, like through the chest area. And I feel like I can take deeper and bigger breaths. I just kind of noticed the overall awareness of my body, and it feels pretty rooted and grounded again.
Rooted and grounded again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica.
Well, thank you.
And whenever Laura wants to come back, we would be happy to welcome her into the room.
I'm back. It's so fun to observe this. Okay, so how are both of you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. Like, I noticed my own nervous system really tracking with Jessica's, which, I mean, we all do this kind of work, so that's unsurprising to us. But that's kind of become one of my cues when I'm kind of synced up with the person that I'm working with, and kind of where we are in our session and what's been happening and all of that.
Yeah. I noticed at the very beginning, because I was tracking with y'all as well, like there was kind of a excitement, kind of whatever, but then like quickly like shifted into it. And it was almost like a collective, just like relief. And it was like all three of us were looking out our respective windows, and it was like coming into the room. Just like being in sync and really tracking with everything. And I felt like it just kind of set everything up. And I personally, which I know we'll probably, we've talked about, of like this idea of not having to work with much content. And so I thought it was really awesome that it was like your content in total was about 2 sentences, but yet there was so much body awareness, as well as being able to track, kind of that rise in activation, and then letting it come back to a place of settling and checking back in, which I thought was really cool, because so many times, we can be really aware of like, oh, I'm getting really, really activated, but we don't take the time to like support it all the way back down. And so I thought that was like a really, like, Jeremy, you did a really good job of like leading through and back down into that more settled space, and then really letting it integrate. I mean, I think the session length was like perfect for that, like really like letting it integrate, checking back in, like resettling, but then also landing at a place of like goodness, of going, yeah, I like, like noticing what is it like to feel good in your body? Where's the expansion, right? I read a quote somewhere, like if your practitioner doesn't spend like as much time developing like those empowerment, like letting you lean into feelings of goodness and empowerment, the same amount that you're like leaning into safety and coping skills, like we're not doing something right. So I love that was there as well. So yeah, those are a couple of my observations. How are you feeling, Jess?
It was so fascinating because I loved the fact that I could feel both the settling in the beginning and kind of coming into looking out the window and feeling the goodness of that. But also the kind of activation that did show up, was probably like 4, 5, 6 out of 10 ish. And even had some disassociation pieces. I think I kind of lost the bottom half of my body a little bit in going so far in there. But his ability, I wanted to help myself, but he touched on a developmental piece of having support from exterior to me.
Yes.
And that, like, we call it titration, but the support or the like easing into resources that are available, even in the midst of like activation, was huge. And it was so interesting because as I was there, it did not occur to me how there could be an external resource that way. And so that was really helpful in the settling. And I think you're right, like that spending at least as much, if not more time, either in the support pieces and finding those resources that titrate it, or that you're into only resource and you're just feeling deeper into safety. I find that safety piece and working only from that to be the most effective in doing this work. So yeah, I just really felt like that was a perfect encapsulation of how that's executed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jeremy, how do you feel?
I feel there were some spots where I caught myself intervening in the story kind of sooner than I sometimes think to. I noticed that as she was thinking about this thing that was coming up, I had this impulse to, let's slow it down here before this gets to be too big of or too much activation to work with. And it seemed like from Jessica's response, it seemed like that was that impulse to kind of pause there and just work with that little piece of activation, which turned out to be not just a little piece of activation. Like there was, even in just that little bit of story, there was a pretty significant piece of activation to work with. And so as she was talking about, she gave some really great imagery cues, like this woundedness, this braid. And we have SciBAM that we use in this world: sensation, image, behavior, affect, and meaning. And so there was this image, and I was curious about what else feels connected with this. And there was some emotion that was connected with that. There was some
meaning popped right out.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so for me, most of the time people come into our offices super well versed in this meaning channel, the story, the plot, the what it's about. And I have this way of thinking about those components. Like I have this little 5-channel mixing board, and the meaning channel is usually pretty high for most people that show up in our office. And when I'm curious, what I'm trying to like see, can we create a more integrated mix here with all of these components rather than having one kind of dominating. So that's what I was kind of thinking about here. Like, what else might want to come in as resource? And there was also like some action, like that be part of SciBAM, where you actually gave yourself, Jessica, some physical support to your abdomen.
I'm curious to know if you could, for those people who are listening and not watching, for you as the person in the therapist role, what did you notice in Jessica with like the activation piece where you're like, oh, there's a little activation here. Let's move into it, but not shoot way up, and kind of get her to this really activated place.
Well, so we had talked a little bit before we started recording about this event that's coming up. And I knew kind of from that this had quite a bit of activation. So that was already my cue that this might need a little bit of slowing down. But also as she was talking, there was, a little bit of like speeding up in her speech pattern. Her eyes were moving a little bit more. Just little cues like that let me know, there's some activation that's starting to show up now. And rather than like waiting until this gets really amped up and we're having to work with and try and negotiate a lot of nervous system activation, because in a 50-minute session, that can sort of be a frustrating amount to work with on both sides. Like there's almost too much for the nervous system to metabolize, digest, move through. So giving the nervous system some chance to we'll just take off a little bite here based on the things that I'm seeing. This seems like a good spot to interrupt, not because I'm wanting to shut down what's going on, but because if this keeps going, there's going to be more than is going to be digestible.
Mhm.
But yeah, those were some of the cues that I noticed, that like the speeding up, a little bit of speeding up in talking, and eyes were moving a little bit more. And
Yeah. And I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Jessica, but I'm curious to know because, when we talked about like, okay, let's not do like a level 10 activation or something for you as the person who's experiencing this, knowing the activation beforehand, just even thinking about it, just with that little piece that we worked with today, how does that feel in terms of like the upcoming experience? Like, is it like, oh, I'm good now? Or are you feeling, 15% better? Or I'm just curious to know from your experience, because I think on the client side of it, we often think we have to have this really big cathartic expression that in order for it to be done or fixed or healed or whatever it is. And yet there's something that happened there that feels really meaningful. So yeah, I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So piece of it that feel really helpful is even just knowing that these things will show up there, that, oh, like I'm probably going to feel something through my midsection and through my gut. Like that is a natural response to what's happening. And I know that's already going to happen. And on some level, that feels nice to know. But also it feels helpful to talk about, okay, what can I do on stage to kind of like mitigate the fact that some of this will probably be there? Whether it is self-touch to the area and supporting myself, or whether it is finding the eyes that feel calming for me, or the ones that feel supportive for me. And to know, like I have experience now to know that those will support me, right? It's not just like, oh, I think. No, I like know those things will support this experience. And then also, I think on some level, whenever you know something's going to be a certain way, for whatever reason, in my experience, it's less. Like it just is. Now, I haven't gone through this experience yet, so I don't actually know if that's going to be true about this experience, but it feels like I'm prepped for something that might have felt like too much to allow myself to now experience it at least a little bit less. So instead of maybe a 4 or a 5, maybe it's only like a 2 or a 3.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up this conversation, or this part of the conversation, I'm curious to know from both of you, like as somatic experiencing practitioners, is there anything else you want people to know about somatic experiencing, this particular experience, what you wish you could tell clients, what you wish, they could understand? Yeah. Anything comes to mind?
I think for me is how little content really is necessary to work with. But also, I understand most people have a part of them that wants to be heard. Your story wants to be witnessed. And I can totally identify with that. But also how little it takes to bring about the activation that you can work with, and that actually opening up these other channels can actually make your witnessing of yourself better. Because I think the part is we think we want to be witnessed by another person, but I think on some level we want to witness ourselves. Like we want to hear ourselves. And so to me, this opens up the idea that maybe I don't have to tell the whole story for somebody to be able to witness me and for me to witness myself. And then also this piece around with somatic experiencing, I find that it is unique in religious trauma because it can't be manipulated. Laura could not, or Jeremy doing this practice could not know what's going on in my body. I am the only person in the universe that knows the sensations in my body. They cannot be manipulated that way. They are self-safety in a way. And I feel like this does such a good job of creating a space where there's no manipulation here, which is the opposite of what so many people have experienced. And it's just about witnessing what shows up and being okay with whatever that is, emotion, sensation, image, and also the narrative or the meaning that comes from those things. So I feel like this gives people a really good picture that actually those things are just as valuable as being heard in the traditional sense.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Jeremy, putting you on the spot. Anything to add to that?
I feel like some of what I'm going to say will just duplicate that, but in different language. I think, like coming from an attachment lens, my background's marriage and family therapy, but this really feels like we're facilitating an attuned relationship between the client and themselves. And especially for those of us that grow up in environments that were negating of the self and that created a lot of distance and disconnection from self, this creates a variety of inroads for us to be able to hear ourselves better. That's different from some of the ways that when that meaning channel is turned all of the way up, sometimes, at least, and I will just speak for myself here, sometimes I'm actually just talking over myself and this isn't actually emerging from a space that's connected with me. Sometimes this is me actually getting stuck in meaning, trying to find my way back to regulated. And so this gives me some other points of entry into the experience that aren't as dependent on language itself. So there's that piece. Also, the thing that I've trained at other trauma modalities, and the thing that I love about SE is that there's nothing that we do in session that clients can't use. And I think that that's the wonderful thing about it, is that everything that we're doing is usable by our clients outside of session. And so we're handing them tools to navigate their own experience that doesn't need an elevated professional to facilitate this in the ways that some other things that can only work in EMDR, for example. You have to have a therapist doing that. I can't just wave my fingers at my own eyes and make this happen. But I can learn how to listen to my own nervous system, pay attention to my own internal cues of regulation and dysregulation, and learn myself in that way so that I can also, in this process, I'm learning ways to find my way back to ground when I don't have somebody else to help me get there.
Yeah.
All ways that we're titrating and negotiating these little pieces of nervous system activation, this is helping the nervous system learn that, oh, I can find my way back to ground. Oh, I can find my way back to ground. Oh, I can find my way back to ground.
Yeah. It's funny. It feels almost like a rebellious therapy modality or trauma resolution modality as it compares to fundamentalism and high control religion that spends so much time divorcing us from our bodies. And we're the proverbial F you, watch me be in my body and thrive, essentially. Because I mean, we have had this conversation multiple times of how empowering somatic experiencing can be, because you are the tool. You are you don't have to go purchase anything or whatever. You're walking home with it. I absolutely love that. And then to that point of the different meaning channels. So whether we use that acronym SIBAM or times channels, I was with a friend who is aware of somatic experiencing and has done some of that work in their own life and trauma resolution. And I had an experience with this person where there was some extreme activation, and we came back to it the next day because there's permission in the relationship to do that. And I asked a question, and they were able to tap into the image channel to say, here's the image that's happening right now. But what it was basically closing the door, trying to shut everything down, in conversation and not even being able to speak. And yet I was aware enough to know that this person was wanting to actually find resolve. And we have an agreement in our relationship that I can employ somatic experiencing questions and techniques. And I did ask for permission. I said, would it be okay if I, kind of led you through something? And so with zero content whatsoever, we kind of did something and got this person to a settled place. And there was no content whatsoever, which I just love, because I think so many times, and even we learned in therapy school, like, you just talk about it. But there's a lot of people that can't talk about some of the scariest moments of their lives, that may not even have the cognitive memory to do so. And so to have this modality where it was like, in this case with this friend, to go, there was a whole lot of story happening that couldn't be verbalized, but this person felt it in various places of their body. And I was like honored enough to be able to say, okay, let's go there. I just put your focus there and notice what happens. And they really did. They came down to this like very settled place. We're able to like go through the rest of their day, kind of, take a walk to kind of help it integrate. And then that was it. They didn't have like a trauma hangover the next day, like where they normally would have. So anyways, I just say that because I think that's something really beautiful about SE, that there's all these, we don't have to work with the content. We don't have to know what's going on. The listeners of this podcast will have no idea what it is that you're actually doing, Jessica, and that's okay. Anyways, but I'm really, excuse me. I'm really grateful for the two of you doing this. And I know we've talked about maybe doing some additional podcast episodes as we continue to invite people into the observer role of somatic experiencing and what sessions look like and how to navigate trauma resolution. So I'm excited to have you all back. And any final words?
This was super fun.
I love it.
Super fun. It was super fun.
It's like when three therapists walk into a bar. This is what you get.
This is you observing their weird hobbies.
Exactly. And if only we were lying, but we're not.
But we're not.